One racist comment, one powerful secret. She insulted the wrong passenger, and in seconds, her entire career was on the line. This is the story of Jasmine Carter, a young black woman traveling for an opportunity of a lifetime, unaware that the flight she was about to board would change everything. This wasn't just any flight. It was a first-class cabin, full of people used to privilege. And one flight attendant believed that her uniform gave her power, but Jasmine was about to prove her wrong. Before we dive in, I need you to do something. Hit that like button, subscribe, and comment below if you've ever felt invisible, underestimated, or treated unfairly just because of who you are. Every like, every comment, every subscriber shows Jasmine, and all of us, that standing up matters. Jasmine Carter, 24, from Atlanta, Georgia, had always dreamed of traveling first class. Today, she was flying to New York City for a career-changing opportunity. She carried her laptop bag, a small purse, and hope in her eyes. Nothing could have prepared her for what she would face in the next few minutes. The cabin doors opened. Passengers streamed in. The hum of chatter mixed with rolling suitcases echoed down the aisle. Jasmine scanned the seats and finally found hers. 2A, a VIP window seat with extra legroom. She smiled, thinking, finally, a little comfort. But that comfort wouldn't last. Emily, the flight attendant, a woman in her late 20s, walked briskly down the aisle. Her uniform was crisp, her hair pulled back, her smile polite but forced. She had a presence that demanded obedience. And when she stopped at Jasmine's seat, the air changed. "Excuse me, ma'am, this seat is reserved for VIP passengers. Could you please move?" Emily asked. Jasmine froze. Her heart pounded. She had every right to this seat. But the words, the tone, the unspoken message, it hit differently. A mix of fear, anger, and disbelief surged through her. A chill ran down her spine. She felt the weight of everyone's eyes on her. The whispers of privilege and entitlement in this cabin were heavy. And in that moment, she realized that sometimes, courage begins with a simple refusal. Jasmine's mind raced. She thought of every time she had been underestimated, ignored, or made to feel invisible. Every microaggression she had brushed off suddenly felt like it had led to this moment. And yet she refused to let fear control her. She looked around the cabin. Some passengers avoided eye contact. Some whispered. Some pulled out their phones, maybe ready to record. The world seemed to shrink around her. But deep inside, Jasmine found a spark of resolve. This was her seat. This was her dignity. And she wasn't giving it up. "I've worked too hard to be invisible. I will not move. Not today. Not for anyone," she thought. Emily's smile tightened. She had encountered refusals before, but there was something different about Jasmine. Composed. Unshakable. And that calm terrified her. Other passengers shifted in their seats. A few gasped quietly. The atmosphere thickened. Every second stretched longer. Jasmine's heart pounded, but she refused to look away. She knew this moment could change everything, not just for her, but for anyone who had ever been pushed aside. Little did Jasmine know that her decision at this very moment would trigger a chain of events that no crew member, no passenger, and not even she could predict. One call, one choice, one act of courage, and everything would change. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed and hit the notification bell. Like this video if you feel Jasmine's courage, and comment below, what would you do if you were in her shoes? Your voice matters. The storm is just beginning. The cabin was tense. Jasmine sat in her seat, gripping the armrest, her heart racing. Emily, the flight attendant, hovered nearby, her eyes sharp, her posture rigid. Every movement Emily made seemed calculated, as if she was trying to assert authority over Jasmine. "Move," she repeated, her tone sharper this time. "This seat is for a VIP passenger." Jasmine's stomach churned. She had been here before, in smaller ways, feeling the weight of someone else's entitlement pressing down on her. But this was different. This was public, visible, undeniable. She could feel the stares of fellow passengers, some sympathetic, some indifferent, and others silently judging her for daring to defy authority. Jasmine took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had a choice: comply and quietly surrender, or stand firm and risk confrontation. Her mind flashed through a lifetime of moments where she had felt powerless, invisible, ignored. Each memory added to her resolve. "I will not move," she whispered to herself, "not for anyone." Emily's eyes narrowed, sensing resistance, a challenge she had not anticipated. "Ma'am," she said, voice rising just enough to be heard, "please, I insist. It's company policy." Jasmine's hand tightened on the armrest, knuckles whitening. She looked straight at Emily and spoke calmly but firmly. "This is my assigned seat. I am not moving." A hush fell over the cabin. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, glancing from Jasmine to Emily, unsure how to react. A few took out their phones, ready to capture the unfolding scene. The tension was electric, as if the air itself held its breath. Jasmine could feel the power dynamics shifting with every second. Emily, used to compliance, was unprepared for defiance delivered with poise and dignity. Jasmine's mind wandered briefly, reflecting on every subtle injustice she had faced, every time she had been underestimated. She realized that courage often came at the moment you least expect it, and it came with a price. But she was ready to pay it. As Emily's frustration grew, she straightened her posture and tried to regain control of the situation, adjusting her smile into something professional, something forced. Yet, the passengers could sense the strain, and Jasmine could feel the small shift in energy, a subtle but undeniable recognition that she was not backing down. The cabin seemed to quiet, the hum of the airplane engines blending with the tension in the room. Jasmine's internal voice was steady. "Stand tall. This is your moment. They cannot take this from you." She noticed a few sympathetic faces, small nods of support, almost imperceptible but encouraging. And then came the moment of clarity, the realization that this was bigger than a seat, bigger than a flight, bigger than Emily. This was about dignity, respect, and refusing to allow someone else's privilege to dictate her worth. The atmosphere was heavy, each second stretching longer than the last, every passenger silently waiting to see what would happen next. Jasmine knew that one choice, one single act, could ripple far beyond this moment, affecting not only herself but everyone who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed because of the color of their skin. She exhaled slowly, feeling a surge of courage that steadied her nerves. "I will not move," she repeated in her mind. "This is my seat. I belong here." A subtle murmur passed through the cabin, some in admiration, others in disbelief. The tension between Jasmine and Emily was palpable, and for a moment, it seemed time itself had slowed. The flight attendant took a step back, reassessing the situation, her own confidence shaken for the first time. And as Jasmine sat tall, head held high, a quiet determination radiated from her, sending an unspoken message. This seat, this moment, and this dignity would not be surrendered. If you've ever faced a moment like this, where standing your ground felt impossible, comment below and share your story. Every voice matters, every act of courage is inspiring, and Jasmine's is just beginning. Little did anyone know, what happened next would escalate in ways no one on this plane could have imagined. The storm was building, and this was only the opening chapter. The cabin felt smaller now, the air thick with tension. Jasmine remained in her seat, her posture straight, her gaze calm but unwavering. Emily, the flight attendant, stepped closer, her voice tight, controlled, but edged with frustration. "Ma'am, I really must insist. Please move to another seat. This is not optional." Jasmine's heart pounded, but she held her ground. She remembered every lesson she had learned about standing firm, about not letting anyone diminish her worth. "I'm not moving. This is my assigned seat," she said, her voice steady, unwavering, carrying a quiet strength that made even Emily pause. Around them, passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some stared, unsure where to look, while a few exchanged glances that said more than words ever could. The whispers were subtle, but they carried the weight of tension, judgment, and silent support. Jasmine's mind raced, replaying memories of every slight she had endured throughout her life. The times she had been ignored, underestimated, or dismissed simply because of the color of her skin. And now, all those moments converged in this tiny, first-class cabin. She could feel the eyes on her, some expectant, some doubtful. The weight of their attention could have been paralyzing, but instead, it fueled her determination. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her uniform, trying to maintain composure. She had been in control countless times, but Jasmine's calm defiance was different, challenging the very authority she had relied on. The murmurs grew louder, passengers subtly recording on their phones, capturing a scene that would become more than just an argument over a seat. It was a quiet confrontation with systemic bias, played out thousands of feet above the ground. Jasmine breathed deeply, grounding herself. She knew that yielding now would not only surrender the seat but also her dignity, her voice, and her right to be seen as equal. And she refused to do that. The seconds stretched, each one a drumbeat of suspense echoing through the cabin. Emily's insistence wavered, and for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. Jasmine noticed it and held her gaze, silently asserting that she would not back down. Passengers shifted, some leaning forward slightly, caught in the gravity of the moment. Others whispered quietly to themselves, sensing the tension, feeling the courage that radiated from Jasmine. And in that charged silence, Jasmine realized something profound. Courage often emerges in the face of authority, and dignity is claimed by those brave enough to defend it. The confrontation was escalating, but Jasmine's resolve remained unshaken. She could see Emily's frustration mounting, hear the polite but tense instructions faltering in her voice. Every subtle gesture, every heartbeat, told a story of power, of privilege, and of the quiet defiance standing in its way. Jasmine's mind was clear. "This is my seat. I belong here. I will not move," she repeated silently, each thought reinforcing her courage. And as the tension continued to build, a realization dawned. This was bigger than just a seat. It was about standing up for oneself, about resisting the unspoken rules that sought to diminish her, and about showing anyone watching that compliance was optional, but integrity was non-negotiable. If you've ever had to defend your dignity, comment below and share your story. Tell the world what it means to stand firm when the odds are stacked against you. The passengers waited, the cabin holding its collective breath, as the standoff continued. And little did anyone know, Jasmine's next move would escalate this confrontation in ways that no one aboard could have anticipated. The storm was rising, and this aisle was the calm before the most dramatic twist yet. The cabin was quiet, but not empty of emotion. Every passenger seemed to sense that something significant was unfolding. Eyes flickered between Jasmine and Emily, some wide with surprise, some narrowed with judgment, and others glimmering with quiet admiration. The tension was palpable, as if the air itself had thickened, holding its breath along with Jasmine. She sat tall, her back straight, her hands resting calmly on the armrests, but inside, her heart raced. Every pulse was a reminder of the stakes, her dignity, her safety, her voice, all balanced on a single choice. Around her, passengers whispered softly, exchanging glances, some capturing the moment on their phones, others simply watching in silent support. A woman a few rows back leaned slightly forward, murmuring to her companion, "I can't believe she's standing her ground." A man in the aisle row shook his head, muttering, "I would have moved. I couldn't do it." Jasmine could hear these words faintly, but she didn't falter. The murmurs, the glances, the judgment, they all faded into the background as her resolve solidified. Emily, meanwhile, fidgeted slightly, checking her watch, her smile tightening, her authority subtly cracking under the weight of a passenger who refused to be intimidated. She straightened and took a step back, as if trying to regain composure, but the pause revealed more than words ever could: uncertainty, frustration, and the slow dawning realization that she was no longer fully in control. The other passengers began to react in small ways. A slight nod here, a subtle murmur of support there. Some stared, speechless, witnessing an act of courage that was rare in everyday life. Jasmine felt it, a quiet energy flowing from the silent observers, as if their unspoken support was giving her strength. She realized that this confrontation was bigger than just a seat. It was about principle, about respect, about refusing to allow someone else's entitlement to diminish her. And in that moment, she understood that her actions could ripple far beyond this cabin, beyond this flight, beyond this day. One small act of courage can inspire countless others, and she was living proof of that truth. The tension stretched, long seconds filled with anticipation, every passenger now aware of the unspoken battle of power, privilege, and courage unfolding at 30,000 feet. Some passengers subtly reached for their phones, others leaned slightly forward, almost holding their breath, but all were witnesses to a moment that would stay with them long after the plane landed. And then, as the hum of the engines blended with the nervous murmurs, Jasmine felt a flicker of calm determination. This was her moment, her stand, her voice. And she would not let it be silenced. If you've ever watched someone courageously stand their ground, or if you've done it yourself, comment below and share your story. Every voice counts. Every act of bravery matters. And little did anyone know, the next move in this high-stakes confrontation would take everyone by surprise, pushing the limits of authority, privilege, and courage to the breaking point. Jasmine sat in her seat, breathing slowly, trying to steady the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Fear pressed against her chest like a weight, and yet, beneath it, a spark of determination glowed. She thought about the countless times she had been underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed, not because of her skills, her intelligence, or her effort, but because of the color of her skin. Each memory fueled her resolve. Every small injustice she had endured was no longer just a memory, it was preparation for this very moment. She realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting in spite of it. And right now, standing firm in this aisle, she needed every ounce of courage she could muster. Emily's insistence had grown sharper, more impatient, yet Jasmine refused to give in. The power struggle was palpable, and she could feel it vibrating through the cabin. Every whisper, every sideways glance, every tiny movement of the passengers' bodies heightened her awareness. She considered the risks, angering the crew, being labeled difficult, or causing a scene. But then she reminded herself that compliance was easy, but it would cost her dignity. She reminded herself that backing down would reinforce the very systems of entitlement and bias she had spent her whole life quietly resisting. Jasmine's thoughts shifted to a more practical plan. She would remain calm, poised, and unshakable. She would not allow emotion to give Emily the upper hand. She would meet every word with composure, every glance with quiet strength. And then a thought crossed her mind. Her mother. Strong, respected, connected. If anyone could help navigate the aftermath of this confrontation, it was her. Jasmine felt a surge of hope mixed with determination. But this hope needed to be tempered with strategy. She could not act rashly. Every decision counted. Every reaction mattered. Her gaze swept across the cabin once more, noting the reactions of her fellow passengers. Some were watching, some filming, some whispering quietly. Their silent observation reminded her that her actions were visible, and the ripple effect could reach far beyond this flight. Jasmine took another deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs and the courage flow into her chest. She whispered to herself, "I will not move. I will not be intimidated. I will stand my ground." The cabin seemed to hold its breath along with her, the hum of the engines blending with the tension in the air. And then, as Emily opened her mouth to speak again, Jasmine felt a calm clarity. She knew what she had to do next. This moment was more than a test of courage. It was a defining point, a statement, and a choice. A choice to protect her dignity, her voice, and her right to be seen and respected. If you've ever faced a moment where fear pressed down and courage was your only option, comment below. Share your story and remind the world that standing firm in the face of injustice is always worth it. Little did anyone know, Jasmine's next move would escalate the standoff, change the course of the flight, and challenge the very authority that thought it controlled her. Jasmine's heart still raced, but now her mind was clear. She knew she couldn't just sit and wait for this to escalate. She needed a plan, one that would protect her dignity and make sure the injustice she was facing did not go unanswered. Slowly, calmly, she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her expression remained composed. She dialed the one person she knew could intervene, her mother. A powerful, respected executive, known for her unwavering resolve and influence. As the call connected, Jasmine whispered under her breath, "Mom, I need you." Emily noticed the subtle movement and leaned slightly closer, her curiosity and suspicion piqued. The cabin seemed to grow quieter, as if the plane itself sensed the shift in energy. Jasmine's mother answered, her voice calm, confident, and commanding. Jasmine explained the situation in hushed tones, careful to relay the injustice without losing composure. With every word, she felt her own strength grow. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. This was about sending a message that courage and dignity could not be erased by entitlement or bias. As Jasmine spoke, Emily's confidence began to waver. She didn't know about the call, didn't understand the influence Jasmine wielded behind the scenes. And that uncertainty was a crack in her authority, a shift that passengers instinctively noticed. Some leaned forward, curious, whispering softly among themselves. Jasmine finished the call, a quiet but determined smile spreading across her face. She had taken action. She had not cowered. And now, every move Emily made would be measured against the knowledge that Jasmine had the support of someone with real power. The cabin atmosphere changed subtly, but undeniably. Where there had been tension and fear, there was now a mix of awe, anticipation, and quiet respect. Jasmine felt the energy shift around her. She had reclaimed control, not by aggression, but by strategy, courage, and poise. If you've ever needed to call on your inner strength, or the support of someone who believes in you, comment below. Share how you stood up in the face of unfairness. Jasmine's bold move was only the beginning. Little did Emily know, this call would set into motion a series of events that would shake the entire crew, alter the course of the flight, and teach everyone aboard a lesson they would never forget. Jasmine hung up the phone, a quiet sense of control settling over her. She didn't need to shout, argue, or raise her voice. The call itself carried weight, the kind of weight that could move mountains, the kind that made even the most confident people pause. Across the cabin, Emily continued her polite but increasingly tense gestures, unaware of the invisible force now backing Jasmine. The flight crew, sensing something was different but unable to pinpoint it, exchanged quick glances, subtle frowns, and whispered speculations. Jasmine sat upright, calm, her hands resting lightly on her lap, her eyes forward, radiating quiet strength. This small act of composure, backed by influence and authority, was already changing the dynamic. The tension in the cabin had shifted. Emily's confidence faltered. She straightened, adjusted her smile, and attempted to regain the semblance of control, but every gesture now carried a hint of uncertainty. The other crew members glanced toward her, wondering what had caused the sudden change. They didn't know about Jasmine's mother, the CEO, the power silently exerted from the other end of that phone call. But they felt it, like a ripple through the air, a shift in the hierarchy they had long taken for granted. Passengers watched quietly, some leaning forward slightly, sensing that this was no longer just a standoff over a seat. It was about authority, accountability, and the unexpected consequence of underestimating someone's courage. The hum of the engines blended with the silent tension in the cabin, punctuated by the subtle whispers of passengers noticing Emily's unease. Jasmine allowed herself a small, controlled exhale. She had taken action, and the effect was immediate. Emily's polite tone now carried an edge of hesitation, a nervous energy that passengers and crew alike could sense. And with that subtle shift, a new reality began to form. The balance of power had tilted, and no one could ignore it. If you've ever seen someone underestimated and quietly commanding respect, comment below. Share your story, because courage has a way of shifting the world, even in moments that seem small. Little did anyone aboard realize, this was only the beginning. The influence of Jasmine's mother, the CEO, would soon ripple through the entire flight, sending shockwaves that would challenge every assumption the crew had made about control, authority, and justice. The stage was set, and the next act, unfolding in real time at 30,000 feet, would leave every witness stunned. The shift in the cabin was palpable. Emily's earlier confidence had eroded, replaced by a flicker of doubt that no amount of polite smiles could mask. She glanced at her fellow crew members, and in that instant, panic began to ripple through the team. Whispers passed between them, subtle but urgent, as each one tried to gauge what had just happened, what unseen force had suddenly shifted the balance of power. The first-class cabin, once orderly and calm, now felt charged with tension. Passengers noticed the change, eyes flicking from the crew to Jasmine, sensing that something beyond a simple seat dispute was at play. Jasmine, sitting quietly, exuded an unshakable calm. Her hands rested lightly in her lap, her posture straight, her gaze forward. She was aware of the subtle tremors in the crew's behavior, the hesitation in Emily's instructions, the way her colleagues now looked at each other as if searching for guidance. Emily opened her mouth to speak again, but no words came. The crew's whispers grew more urgent, the unease spreading like wildfire. One attendant glanced toward the cockpit, as if seeking confirmation or reassurance, only to find none. The uncertainty was contagious, and for the first time, the flight attendants felt vulnerable, exposed. Jasmine noticed it all, absorbing the subtle shifts with quiet satisfaction. The crew had underestimated her, underestimated the influence and support behind her. And now, they were facing the consequences of that miscalculation. The passengers, too, were acutely aware of the tension. Some leaned forward slightly, capturing the moment on their phones. Others exchanged knowing glances, recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary, a display of quiet power, dignity, and courage in the face of authority. Jasmine's mind remained steady. She knew that panic in the crew only reinforced her position. She maintained her composure, her calmness contrasting sharply with the rising tension around her. The cabin seemed to hold its collective breath as Emily struggled to regain control, but each attempt only revealed more cracks in the crew's confidence. If you've ever seen authority shaken by the quiet strength of one person, comment below. Share your story, because moments like this remind us that courage can disrupt even the most rigid hierarchies. Little did the crew know, the consequences of this standoff were about to escalate beyond their worst fears, and the events set in motion by Jasmine's bold decision would soon change the course of the flight forever. The cabin was electric, every passenger acutely aware of the unfolding drama. What had started as a simple dispute over a VIP seat had transformed into a powerful confrontation, one that challenged authority and demanded attention. Eyes followed Jasmine, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the growing panic among the crew. Whispers passed quickly through the rows, passengers exchanging quiet observations and subtle gestures of support. A man near the back of the cabin murmured to his companion, "I've never seen anyone stand their ground like that before." A young woman nodded, phone in hand, recording the moment, as if capturing history in real time. Emily's polite instructions faltered, her words now hesitant and strained. The other flight attendants shifted uneasily, clearly unsure how to respond to a passenger who refused to yield and carried the weight of influence behind her. Jasmine sat tall, eyes forward, radiating quiet authority. She was no longer just a passenger in her seat, she had become a symbol of dignity, courage, and resistance. The subtle energy in the cabin shifted further as passengers recognized that this was more than a moment of conflict. It was a moment of justice, of standing up against entitlement and bias. The air seemed charged, each subtle glance, each whisper, reinforcing the power of what Jasmine had accomplished without raising her voice. Passengers exchanged looks of admiration, some leaning closer, others recording silently, bearing witness to a story that would stay with them long after the flight ended. Jasmine felt the ripple of support, an invisible shield strengthening her resolve. She knew the impact of her actions extended beyond this plane, beyond this day, and into the lives of everyone watching. If you've ever witnessed someone boldly standing up for what's right, comment below. Share how it made you feel, because courage is contagious, and moments like this remind us of the power of standing firm. The flight crew's anxiety was now visible to everyone. Emily's attempts to reassert control only highlighted the cracks in their authority. The passengers' silent acknowledgement of Jasmine's courage made the atmosphere almost tangible, a tension that mixed suspense, admiration, and disbelief. Little did anyone on the plane know, this was only the beginning. The chain of events set in motion by Jasmine's decision would soon reach a climax, forcing the crew to face consequences they had never imagined. The cabin had become a stage for justice, and every eye was fixed on the woman who refused to be intimidated. The tension in the cabin had reached its peak. Emily's polite composure had completely cracked, and the other flight attendants could no longer hide their unease. Whispers spread through the crew like wildfire, quiet murmurs of disbelief, anxiety, and panic. Every subtle gesture betrayed their growing awareness that they were no longer in control. Jasmine remained calm, her presence steady, her hands resting lightly on her lap. The passengers watched closely, sensing the shift, some leaning forward, some recording, all bearing witness to what was unfolding. The unseen power behind Jasmine's courage, the call to her mother, had sent ripples through the cabin, and now the crew was feeling the first tangible effects. Emily's attempts to reassert authority were met with resistance, subtle but undeniable, and every motion she made seemed to emphasize her vulnerability rather than control. The other flight attendants glanced at each other, their eyes betraying panic and uncertainty. Decisions that would normally have been automatic now required careful consideration. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and tension. Jasmine's calm confidence highlighted the crew's faltering authority, making every hesitation and misstep more pronounced. Passengers could see it, sense it, and feel the power of a quiet rebellion against entitlement and bias. If you've ever seen someone's confidence falter in the face of courage, comment below. Share your thoughts, because witnessing justice, even in subtle forms, can be transformative. The first whispers of action began to circulate among the crew. There were glances toward the cockpit, hurried conversations under their breath, and nervous adjustments to uniforms and equipment. They realized that their decisions, their authority, and their careers could be affected by what was unfolding. And in that charged silence, Jasmine remained the eye of the storm, calm, dignified, and unwavering. The passengers, too, felt the shift, recognizing that this moment was no longer just a personal confrontation but a statement about power, respect, and accountability. Little did anyone realize, the events set in motion would soon reach a dramatic climax. Decisions would be made, actions would be taken, and the balance of power on this flight would be permanently altered. And for Jasmine, this was only the beginning. The ripple from Jasmine's bold decision was reaching further than anyone on the plane could see. Back at the airline's headquarters, her mother's call had triggered immediate attention. Executives were briefed, the situation analyzed, and the actions of the crew were now under scrutiny. On the flight, Emily and her colleagues could feel the weight of authority shifting, though they didn't know the full story. Every move, every word, every gesture was being carefully considered, measured, and judged. Jasmine remained calm, her presence commanding the attention of everyone in the cabin. Passengers whispered among themselves, some in disbelief, some in awe, recognizing that this was more than a confrontation. It was a challenge to entrenched privilege, a test of accountability at 30,000 feet. Emily's composure was fraying. She adjusted her uniform, cleared her throat, but her usual confident commands faltered. Her colleagues exchanged worried glances, unsure how to proceed, knowing instinctively that any misstep could have severe consequences. The subtle energy in the cabin shifted, a quiet acknowledgement of Jasmine's power and influence. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't demanded authority, yet her presence alone was enough to change the dynamics entirely. If you've ever witnessed a moment where justice quietly began to assert itself, comment below. Tell the world how courage can disrupt even the most entrenched systems. As whispers passed among the crew and passengers alike, decisions were being made back on the ground. Emails were sent, calls were placed, and the implications of this incident were beginning to reach those who held real power within the airline. Every subtle action on the plane now carried weight, every hesitation, every glance, every breath contributing to the growing tension. Jasmine's calm defiance had not only shifted the energy of the cabin but had also set in motion a corporate response that would soon change the course of events. And for the crew, the realization was dawning. This was no longer a simple dispute over a seat. This was a test of accountability, a reckoning for entitlement, and an illustration that courage backed by authority could never be ignored. Little did anyone know, the next chapter would bring a dramatic confrontation that would leave every passenger, every crew member, and everyone watching in shock. The storm was building, and the consequences were inevitable. The call from Jasmine's mother had reached the highest levels of the airline, and decisions were made almost immediately. Emily and her colleagues were called aside, their nervous glances betraying the fear that had been quietly building in the cabin. One by one, the crew was informed that their behavior was unacceptable, that their actions had violated policy, and that serious consequences were imminent. Panic spread among them, the weight of accountability settling heavily on their shoulders. Jasmine remained in her seat, calm, composed, and dignified. Passengers watched, whispering softly among themselves, witnessing the unfolding justice. Some smiled subtly, others shook their heads in disbelief, but all were aware that what they had witnessed was a rare act of courage rewarded with accountability. The once tense cabin was now filled with a different energy, respect, awe, and a quiet acknowledgement that privilege does not guarantee immunity. The crew, now subdued and anxious, could only comply with the directives from the corporate office. Their authority, once unquestioned in the cabin, had been challenged and corrected in front of everyone. If you've ever witnessed someone face the consequences of entitlement and arrogance, comment below. Share your thoughts, because justice, even in subtle forms, reminds us that courage has power. With the crew held accountable, the cabin slowly settled. Passengers resumed their seats, some exchanging quiet words about the drama they had witnessed. Jasmine remained poised, a quiet smile of relief and triumph crossing her face. She had stood her ground, faced intimidation, and emerged with her dignity intact. The flight continued, but the lessons lingered in the minds of every passenger, every crew member, and anyone who would hear the story later. Courage, integrity, and persistence had won against bias and entitlement. The subtle influence of her mother, combined with Jasmine's own bravery, had changed the trajectory of the flight and set a precedent for accountability that would ripple through the airline. If you've been inspired by Jasmine's story, comment below and tell us what standing up for yourself means to you. Like, subscribe, and share this video so that everyone can witness the power of courage. And remember, this was just one act of bravery, but its impact was felt far beyond a single seat, a single flight, or a single day. Sometimes, the smallest acts of defiance create the biggest change, and Jasmine Carter proved that at 30,000 feet, courage can soar higher than any airplane.